Today on the Idiot's Guide, we're talking about the border crisis. Is it really a crisis or is it a political chess match? Stay tuned. And I like lighthouses. I really do. They're cool, almost majestic, but mostly useless at this point. I'm your host, Adam Richardson, aka the Prophet Hacker, and I am joined by the man in charge, Mr. Joe Haslam. Welcome to the Idiot's Guide. All right, so to really launch us into a potential hot button. I mean, I'm not even going to say potential. This is an absolutely on fire issue right now, like actively within everything political. And if you can go a day without hearing about this on any news channel, I don't know what news you're listening to because it is everywhere. And I think the sad part about that is literally like, let me say this. I'll start off by this. I did my homework, but it was the wrong kind of homework because I wanted this to be the representation of a true form of an idiot guiding people. Only in the sense that I listened to news broadcasts, I read news articles, I scoured the internet with the intention to identify stories about what's going on in the border. And not just the southern border, but borders everywhere, predominantly the southern border. Okay.
Yeah, but there have even been clashes on the northern border.
Yep. And honestly, like learning what I've learned, I feel like I have kind of like a fruit salad full of information, like some of it's this, some of it's that, some of it's good for the salad, some of it's not good for the salad. But and I have this cough that drives me nuts. The point is that I'm looking at this going, man, how do I make this so overwhelmingly confusing? Much like everybody out there, much like everybody who listens to the broadcast, listens to the news, they're not going to be like, hey, today I'm going to focus on getting all factual information about what's going on the border because I know it's out there. I know that information is there. But again, even that factual information coming from one side or the other kind of sounds biased.
Well, everyone has their own natural bias.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing. As neutral as you try to stay, it is fundamentally impossible to be neutral. And that's just because there's so much information out there that you are swayed one way or another. Your own experiences, your own background will define what your opinion is.
And even in the sense of saying, like, I have a bias in the fact that I just disagree with you saying everyone has a bias. And that's my bias.
Right.
Okay, sorry. Maybe not. My head thought that.
But yeah, everyone has a bias. So even when you try to get the neutral opinions, it's not going to be neutral.
Yeah.
It's even if it's, slightly skewed to one way or another, or one viewpoint or another. Because it's not just right or left. It's not just red or blue. There's a lot of nuanced views and opinions that go along with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that gets lost in a lot of the media attention is there is a lot of nuance to it. But any nuance that you look at, there's going to be bias.
Yeah. I think, my goal in doing it that way is just to absorb as much information as I could so that I didn't really have I'm going to have my natural bias, but I have enough confusion about it to go like, well, they said this and so said this, but none of it is like, I have this truth or this fact. I have the opinions of news broadcasters and journalists and what they wrote a statement that took whatever so-and-so said to match their article. I'm not going to say anything's out of context because you can judge that by yourself. However, it also reduces the amount of things that I have to attach at the bottom of our podcast because I don't have any of those. Like I literally just went everywhere, typed in on YouTube, Google searched and read articles from every direction. And I might mention like, hey, I read an article in this, feed, but I don't know. I'd have to go back and see if I could search it up.
Yeah.
But I don't have any like word for word things that I'm going to say. I formed an opinion based on a fruit salad of information.
And for those of you who think we are just stealing information or anything like that, we're doing this on purpose because this is how the average person gets their information. They're not going to remember what article it came from. They're not going to remember they're not going to cite the source when they're having a discussion with someone else.
When your friend and you're pouring a cup of coffee standing next to the coffee maker at the office and you're like, that border crisis, golly, I was reading in this article, page 273. No, you're like, man, did you hear about that border crisis and what they just did yesterday? Oh my goodness. I don't know why all of a sudden I have a Texas accent, but it's happening there.
But yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, when we talk about idiots guiding idiots, we're all idiots. We don't know all the information. And we have to use the information that's presented to us in order to get the best argument possible. Now, there are ways to get information. I mean, you can go and talk to firsthand sources, but that's just not feasible for the vast majority of Americans.
For everyone. Everyone.
I mean, maybe if you're living in Texas in those areas or along the Canadian border, I think Wisconsin is the biggest hotbed for all the Canadian border issues. If you're living up in those areas, then you can go to the borders and see what's actually going on. But realistically, there's no way of getting information other than just reading the news and trying to filter through it to find the truth, or as close to the truth as possible.
So I think what I'm going to do is I feel like I'm going to ask some poking questions and see how we can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that really stands out to me is when we talk about a border crisis, but then we have this concept of safe haven cities and safe haven states. And one of them that comes to mind is like New York or Chicago. Those are a couple really big ones right now that are making the news. And not that good of news. Like a lot of them, they're saying like, hey man, we're in a state of emergency. We can't handle this influx. But in the last 3 days, they documented 30,000 people coming across the border in 3 days. That's an insane amount of people. And though that's how kind of the typical thing at this point in life. It's like, I don't want to say that like, you should just accept that. That's what what was basically seen at the border, processed at the border. That's not everything else coming across the border that isn't coming through a processing center.
Right.
And so you have, a number well beyond that. This is just, okay, this is what we can track. And then we can speculate that because of this tracking and because of the many gaps in the system, that all of a sudden we're running into an extensively larger number than that. But thinking about Chicago's a good example. Recently, it made it in the news because they were talking about how there's a cold front moving through and freezing out the city. Well, they've already filled every place possible. So what they do, they made the school system basically online educate their students and opened up the schools so that they're a safe, warm place for the migrants to live.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where you're like, I understand the need, but now we're trying to be like, okay, we're taking from well-established systems and going, this becomes the priority.
Yeah.
And now you're going, at what cost? What are we, now you have normal citizens who have been here and they have to compromise and adjust what they're doing. And I don't want to sound like a jerk, but I feel like something's wrong in that.
There's a great line. This is from a TV show called The West Wing, and I'm gonna butcher the quote, but the essence is there. But this show, it goes through. It's a political show, but it goes through basically every potential of what a president might or a presidency might go through.
Yeah.
Throughout the series, which is kind of crazy to think that would all happen to one president. But there's a massacre going on in, I think it's Africa. I think it's Kundu. It's a fake nation that they made up for the show. And the Martin Sheen, who plays the president, asks one of his staffers, why is an American life more valuable than a Kundanese life? And the guy that he's talking to says, I don't know, but it is. And then later on in the show, he says, he's right, but that disturbs me. He's perfectly right, but I don't know why.
So it's, basically your answer to the question that I have is literally to agree that I'm okay feeling like something's wrong with that scenario.
Well,
however, like feeling like this life is more important than this life.
It's, and that's the thing, is whose life is more valuable? Whose life is more important? Is it the American life that's more important? Is it the education of the American children that need that in-person schooling? Obviously, in-person schooling is better. But is it, for the majority of students, not all students, but is that more valuable than the life of someone coming from South or Central America? And I think that's really the crux of it, is we come down to the idea of we value American life as greater than the lives of others.
Yeah.
Now, is that right? Depends on who you ask. And I think that's one of the this is one of the nuances that comes in that I was talking about with the border crisis, is some people will say it's not wrong to value one life over another. I mean, we look at what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. We're assisting Ukraine to kill Russian soldiers.
Yeah.
So why are we valuing Ukrainian life over Russian life? We have to deal with these kinds of issues all the time. Now, we value Ukrainian life. That one's a little bit simpler because they were invaded by Russia.
Right.
And so they are the victims in that situation. And that's relatively easy to see. But even in the US, there's still some consternation over Ukrainian assistance.
So what's interesting is that the Ukraine-Russian issue, initially that war and conflict is because of a border.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll shift gears to the Middle East, where there's a conflict happening because of a border. And the refugees that are wishing to not be part of that are not being allowed into other border countries for the sake that they can't, those other countries feel they can't trust individuals from that particular region. Yep. And I'm not going to try to inflame any side of this. I'm just I had this thought of perspective. The U.S. is in this situation that we're in, even budget-wise, because of a border. And all of this conflict, all of this confusion is circulating around border crises everywhere. And, when we talk about, and I say budget because that's the hot button currently in the news, is that, the GOP won't approve any budgeting because of the fact that it's full of another pile of billions going to Ukraine, another pile of billions going to Israel-ish, and then a little bit to add to the employment side to be able to process more into the country at our borders. And so the GOP obviously is the pushback on this, but they're not approving a budget because they're looking at this going, we brought the biggest, most hot button issue right now for us in our country is our border. And it is the smallest ticket item that you have. And it's reinforcing what you're doing down there. And we're saying we can't do that. We can't sustain this. I don't know, like on either side of this, that was something that for me, I felt like, okay, I felt like maybe this was something, we all can admit at some degree or another, our families came as immigrants or migrants to the U.S. Okay. That's normal and natural.
Unless you are of native blood, all citizens of the United States are immigrants to the United States.
Originally, yes. Immigrant or, relative to. At this point, I was born in Boise, Idaho. So that, I'm technically, I'm not a Native American, but I'm native. I'm native to the country. Okay. I can't say I'm not Native American if I'm a Native American. Blah. Okay.
You are a natural born citizen
there you
of
go.
The United States.
That's the word. You're smarter than me.
You're not native. You are natural born citizen.
So my guess is like, I always kind of hear that part of the argument where it's like, hey, we're going to put this out there as a disclaimer that we recognize that we come from ancestry that is migrants to the U.S. And that's great. That's important to acknowledge. However, I don't feel like it's an important aspect of the current setting. But how do I reconcile with this idea that though my family came over at some time to become, part of the United States, is it then my responsibility to, at this point, without some level of, serious control, allow other people into the country? I want to be able to do that, but I also don't want it to just be like, here, it's wide open, come on in, and they're making holes and digging tunnels and hopping on trains and buses and cruising through on like it's nothing. And then they get processed, and they're processed with, a date to come back to it, because they can't process and have a judge sit before this today to be able to process 10,000 immigrants a day, or migrants a day. I don't want to say immigrants, it's migrants. But 10,000 migrants a day. And in that processing, like they're giving this, hey, return to court this day. And then that person's gone. They're allowed to just poof, and they never return. And they just maintain being an illegal immigrant at that point.
Yeah. And, I think that's a good viewpoint. Not necessarily one that I agree with, but that's a good standing viewpoint, is that, yeah, we're immigrants, but does that require, or my ancestors were immigrants, does that now require me to be nice to other people and to offer that same beneficial attitude?
I mean, I let's say this. I'm nice to people.
Yeah, no. Nice was the wrong word.
No. Let's see. Hold on. I need more coffee before I can be nice to people.
But I think it still applies, is because I think there's a level of, there is a base behavior, which is to protect oneself and one's family.
Mm-hmm.
To be nice is to sacrifice of oneself for someone else. That's what being nice is. You are giving up something that you have to give to someone else. So if you are giving donations to charity, I would categorize that as being nice, being generous. Well, in order to do that, you are sacrificing your own monetary benefit for the benefit of someone else. And so it's always an above and beyond behavior. And so I look at this from an economic standpoint. So the first rule in economics, all people do things for their own benefit.
Mm-hmm.
That's the number one rule in economics. That's how all the graphs, all the formulas, everything is based on people will do things for their own benefit.
I agree.
And so when I say to be nice and to go above and beyond, I simply mean we are sacrificing of ourselves to do that. And does our background, does our history require that of us? Just because our families came from other nations, does that mean that we are then obligated to sacrifice of ourselves for someone else in the same category?
I think of this as like, an airplane ride. Okay. And they always say, they always have the introduction, pull the ripcord if you, whatever it is, like to inflate
the oxygen
device,
mask,
pull the oxygen. If in case this happens and oxygen does drop from there, like Alaskan Airlines happened just the other day. Funniest part about that is the kid that was sitting there lost his shirt. There's a video apparently that sounds
really?
amazing, but anyway, that's another thing. But no, I think about always in those instructions is you first put the mask on you and then assist others.
Exactly.
And I think that like, I know that's a real simple scenario or equation, but that's the most honest I can say is to go like, look, when I pay taxes and at the end of the day, those tax dollars are now being inundated and consumed by people who are entering our country illegally, and that's enabling that to continue to perpetuate. Like that to me doesn't sound like I put my mask on first. That sounds like, okay, I'm going to suffocate while everyone else benefits.
Right. And that's exactly the point I was just making is there is that base level of behavior that one must look out for oneself first. And to sacrifice of oneself is going above and beyond. Now, my personal opinion and my personal viewpoint, and part of this is built upon my background, and I love good old George Washington, his viewpoints as well, from a political standpoint, is you help people in need.
Absolutely.
And if that means sacrificing everything that you have, then yes, you do it. And that's the thing is you can either live in prosperity while the world around you falters.
Yeah.
Or you all live in poverty together.
I think maybe the pushback that I would have, and only because I'm a combat veteran, I swore to go defend people's lives at the cost of my own. Potential cost of my own. Right. And because of that, it's a conscious decision to do that and be self-sacrificing beyond, I don't have to check to make sure that my will is in place and my legacy is there. I signed on a line, said I will go do it regardless of if I have a legacy in the future or not. And, it's not a question. It's a yes, that's what I do. Not everybody thinks that's the same way. So I identify with what you're saying in that capacity. However, when I see that what's being done is not just hurting somebody that, like for myself, is going, okay, where I'm at right now, I still am taking care of my wife and children, not necessarily me. So the mentality is there. I want my wife and children to benefit. But when it starts tackling into our own country's poor and destitute, and that's the impact that it's pulling from, that's robbing the poor. And I don't agree with it at all, because I go and defend that. and I'll go and help that situation. And we're just inundating it with more and flooding it and prioritizing the new addition to, rather than take care of what we have first.
Right. And I think this is the big ideological difference here is when you look at Republicans and Democrats, generally speaking, the Republicans are very much about individual liberty. You look at the individual, and that's exactly the point that you're coming from, is that it is, the idea of, if I choose to give, that's my choice. If I choose not to give, that's my choice. Whereas you look at the Democrat side, the liberal side, and it is, no, you should always give. I don't care if you don't want to, you should. And so we're going to make you
mandate it. Yes.
And that really is. So when I was young, my uncle, who is a libertarian, so I grew up with a Republican mother, a Democratic father, and a libertarian uncle. So this is my political background. He explained
Ladies
to
and
me,
gentlemen, this is the reason why we call it the Idiot's Guide.
He explained to me, now this is to the terms of a 9 or 10-year-old. I think he did a very good job of explaining this. But he said, if you get an A and someone else in your class gets an F, then what the Republicans say is that you keep your A, they keep their F. The Democrats say you both get C's, and the libertarians just want you to stay out. There were some more colorful words. But the idea here is, the choice of the matter comes into play. Now, I am also of the opinion that these are human beings. We are all of the same human race. Whether we come from ethnic race or ethnic background or societal background, anything like that, we are all still part of the human race. And who are we if we are leaving people to suffer? And so I am also of the opinion that we are not taxing the rich enough.
Okay.
If we raised taxes, if we increased, and again, I am not alone in this. George Washington agreed with my viewpoint. Okay. If we were to tax the rich enough that it was actually equitable taxes, and I'm not talking flat tax because that taxes more of the poor than the rich.
Right.
So an equitable tax system where we are taxing the rich, we would be in a much better position. But again, that goes back to, I get an A, they get an F, we both get C's. And so Is that appropriate? Is that fair?
And I think I agree with you in that in the taxation side of it. I hear the arguments like, I like the concepts of capitalism. I like that, being like, I want to be, I'm an entrepreneur in mind. So for me to think about like the ingenuity that comes behind that and creativeness constantly is an awesome feeling. There's risk in that, but also the benefit on the other side of it has a really good thing. But, so I hear the argument about like, well, we need to tax the rich more. And then the rich turn around and be like, no, you tax. I pay lots of taxes. I'm like, it's not that you pay taxes. I do get that you pay taxes. It's that you don't pay the right amount for what you make.
Yeah.
And that's only because of the fact that I, as a middle class, pay significantly more as far as my taxes in comparison to somebody who makes tons more than I would. And that's where I think the system, you're right, is not fair. Yeah. And it's always kind of like dodged. We're going to just pull this behind the curtain on the other side of the stage and be like, well, yeah, we're not actually talking about that. But the border, look at the border over here. Well, somebody ought to do something about that. And you're absolutely right.
And I think, we try to simplify the issue way too much. Bringing in a bunch of migrants on the border. Some are coming in with ill intent. I would say probably the majority are coming in with the proper intent and are just trying to live the American dream.
Right.
That's the same thing we're trying to do. They see the value of America and they want to be Americans. And so they come here with that dream, with that view in mind that they can accomplish anything. I
think the hard perspective in that is that how do you, I think it's, one of the phrases that I keep hearing is slow the migrant intake. Yeah. So it's not necessarily that we don't want to make it possible. I think there's some people that are like, shut it down completely. Just make us a sovereign single country. No more, whatever. Yeah. That's not true. But the idea of slow this down and adding the manpower, one, that doesn't poof, all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of new employees down there or up there or wherever this is at. It's more about the fact of creating those positions available and then facilitating that over the period of months. Well, if you have 30,000 migrants move in the last 3 days, then you have, I think it was over 3 years. I looked at a number. It's 8 million people, migrants. That's the population of Tennessee. Like, unbelievable numbers compared to any other time in history. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a fair thing to say, whoa, let's slow this down so it's not just gaping holes that people are rushing through. And that's just processed numbers. That's not everything else that's getting across.
Yeah, and I think part of that is you have to ask why, not why are they coming to the United States, but why are they leaving their countries? They're coming to the United States because they know that this is the land of prosperity.
Right.
This is of all the nations in the world, the United States stands out as a nation of prosperity, a nation of freedom, all of these things that we value. And so that's why they're coming to the United States when they are leaving their home country. But you have to ask, why are they leaving their home country in the first place? And if we want to try to slow things down, well, that may not be possible because of the reasons these people are coming to the United States.
Right.
Why are they leaving their home countries? We've got poverty. We've got dictators. I mean, the number of dictators in the world right now is just astounding.
Well, and you think about, I can try and chase around all over the world the issues that are causing people to migrate, and we are a safe place for them to be able to come to. So we are a beacon or a lighthouse per se, mm-hmm. But the challenge again is to go like, look, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying we gotta ease this a little bit and use for the fact that our border has to contend with the influx, and the countries beyond that border are just barely starting to agree in some level. We don't know yet how they are going to stem some of that so that it's not just this inundation at the border. Yeah. And that's not fair to the U.S. to create that expectation on us to be like, look, we want to do this, but we can't handle it at the capacity and the influx that's happening. That being said, I look at this and I go, some of the statistics they say, we had the statistics about, Democrats versus Republicans on a couple episodes ago. Okay. And you talk about the noisiest parts of the extremes are what the noisiest parts of the parties are these extremes that are 2.5% and 2.5%. If 1% of anybody coming across the border, just 1%, was was a risk, that's still 80,000 extremists. That's a lot to think about, to think that, my mind can wander in a lot of really scary directions. That's almost the population of the city I live in, so that's scary to contemplate and think about. That's just 1%. Now, I wouldn't even give credit to that because it took 2,000 to cause the conflict that we're currently in with Israel, or Israel's currently in with Hamas. Yeah. But it takes, like that. That's the amount of numbers it's taken. If you think about the orchestration for 9/11 and how many it took just to accomplish that, like it's 80,000, even if it's a fraction of that, if it's 1% of that 1%, is still so many that it's a threat to our country.
Right. And I totally agree. And that's where, when I was talking about it, we're oversimplifying this problem at the border, is that we're using bureaucratic systems to solve what should be done on an individualistic basis. And, by trying to shut it down as much as they have, it's opening up a lot more. There needs to be a lot more budget for the border, not to build a wall, but to build systems to allow more to come in. You think about it from an economic perspective. If we've got, what was the number again of immigrants coming in, of migrants coming in?
The last 3 years is 8 million.
8 million. So 8 million migrants coming into the United States. Okay. Now, if we give them all the right to work here in the US, okay, so we better the processes. We make sure we do background checks before we let them in, make sure we look at all the history, do all these things that are a more robust border system. But instead of keeping people out, we allow more in, but with better checks and better processes at the border. So that gives us, you said, what was the number again?
8 million.
8 million. So we've got 8 million.
That's 3 times. You better remember it now.
Yeah. I don't know why I wanted to say 3 million, but 8 million people coming in. Okay. Let's assume that they are each working a basic job making $10 an hour. Okay. And they're working 40 hours a week. So that's $400 a week that these 8 million people over the last 3 years have brought in.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if we give them not necessarily citizenship, but give them a status as a migrant to where they're paying into taxes, their income taxes, their Social Security taxes, Medicare taxes, all those things that we as citizens are getting. Yeah. I mean, and even if you want to, you can separate that out from the citizen fund, and this would be a migrant fund for Social Security, for Medicare, those kinds of social services that are out there. These 8 million people making, what is that? That's $22,000 a year. So what's 8 million times 22,000? That would be what? It's a lot of money. Okay. And 15% of that goes toward... It's a lot. I don't have my calculator with me.
160 billion.
So 160 billion.
I think.
Okay. So 15% of that.
Completely wrong on that one.
Let's use that number. What number did you say?
160 billion.
160 billion. So 160 billion. So we're looking at, what is that? $24 billion of revenue to support the migrant populations. That's just the 15% for FICA taxes, which is Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah.
That we as citizens pay. So that is an increase, and that funds not only them, but just like our Social Security and Medicare, it funds all of the people who have been in there before and all who are coming after.
Yeah.
And so now we have this fund set up, and now let's look at, so $160 billion of income that these individuals are making, assuming they're making the lowest wage. And so we've got 160 billion. Let's just say they pay the minimum tax bracket 10%. Okay. That is $16 billion of income income tax revenue to the federal government by allowing migrants into the country. And that's just 3 years.
So what we see is a budget issue. It's that's really what the crisis is, we keep throwing manpower issues at this, processing power. And like I said, slowing the flow technically is kind of that heart behind this. Like we want to be able to do this, but we've got to slow it down, mainly because our infrastructure can't handle it. And that's not necessarily the responsibility of the migrant. It's the responsibility that we have to do and adjust and maintain. By the way, you should probably run for president and run that budget because or something, whatever it is, like the what is it, Greenspan right now that does it?
No. The problem is we think about these things so simply and we rely so heavily on a structure that was built 200 years ago.
Right.
And the world today is not the same as it was 200 years ago. And so we need to update the structures. We need to update the processes. We need to update everything to be today's world. And when we do that, and actually, a few years ago, the Medicare system, so I have a client down in Georgia, okay? A few years ago, the Medicare and Medicaid system for the Southeast was still running DOS-based computers. And when I say a few years ago, this was like 3 years ago. Okay, they were running DOS. This is what our government runs on, is DOS.
For those of you watching on YouTube, Google, the World Wide Web, and the all of it, AOL, didn't exist when DOS was the king.
It is so archaic. So archaic. And the reason I know this is because
I had an old Atari computer that had DOS, and it was epic.
They were holding payments because they were updating their system.
Okay.
And so it took a month to update their system before they started sending out payments again. And we're running, 50 years behind.
Easily.
Just upgrade the systems, update, improve.
Yeah.
You do that and you're in a completely different world. You've got so much more ability to be able to function. And so it's not necessarily, in my view, a problem with migration into the United States. So you look at Utah. Utah is one of the foremost states for refugees because Utah is becoming the new Silicon Valley.
Right.
We have tech investments. We have infrastructure that can handle a very good influx of the system because we've got the technology behind it.
I think the problem that you run into is the state.
Yeah. But we know how to handle the influx of refugees.
Yeah.
Whereas the federal government is still running on DOS. They can't handle it.
I think that's a good comparison because you think that if this one example of this one place that was running on DOS, taking a month to run probably a 2 kilobyte update, because that was massive back then. But this idea that if you were to contrast our society and the way that we as citizens can adapt to these kinds of changes, it's not necessarily a crisis in our eyes. But when a government is that level of stupid, lack of a better word, I couldn't think of anything, archaic, antiquated, if they're running on a computer system like that, and basically I would say that that's a representation of the operation and in itself. Its own infrastructure is built on this concept of DOS. Yeah. And we are light years ahead of that at this point. It just means, like we all have the conversation about like, you're too old, get out of office kind of a thing. But, I don't want to go on that kind of an attack. Yeah. The problem is that we as a society want to see this thing move forward, and we're trying to still wait for an update on DOS for the next month. And it's moving like a snail, but even if it was moving lightning fast, we don't have the infrastructure. It's constantly being shuffled, dismantled, stopped, hurdled. It depends on what administration comes into office and their agenda in the society that will determine whether or not we can advance. Get out of the way.
Right.
And that I think we agree on this. Like, we may not see the border the same way, but I think we see that the problem is not, it's the fact that we keep leaning towards the government to make a decision where we're like, wait a sec. Like, I hate to say this, but Texas right now, Texas government is doing this, but Texas citizens, the city, they're getting around this. They're handling things, within their area, maybe not in the way that the world would agree with. Okay. But they're trying to basically make this thing happen in the safest way possible. But, safest ways, there's the S, possible. And, by cracking down on people who are exploiting, a new community that doesn't exist. They're selling houses to these people, and they're advertising in Mexico for a community to come up here. They're giving their life savings. I'm like, you're no different than a cartel that's muling these people across the border. Like, you're terrible. You should go to jail. It still exists, but they're being fought at this point. Yeah. You have other issues where you have individuals offering health services, bringing people in. It's a sex trafficking ring, and they're moving them right off into the next big hurdle that you're dealing with. So it's horrific what's happening. And I think that everybody agrees. I mean, the biggest thing that I keep hearing is it's gotten to a point where it's bipartisan. In the government side of it saying, we can't do nothing. This is a problem. But the problem is our infrastructure everywhere has a hard time handling this because we've done a poor job of preparing our societies, our economies to do that. You're right, in the state of Utah, how we also have a tremendous amount of dead, dry desert just west of us, that it's not the prettiest, but we have the intelligence as a society, a modern society, to create an oasis in the middle of that desert. Yeah. And we don't need the resources nearby to be able to do that. We can do it all right there, And so I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit for the ability to, even though the government's antiquated, old, can't keep up, has a failed infrastructure, I can't blame it entirely on them. If I know that when that person arrives in my neighborhood or in my block or on what happens, I can use my own ingenuity to make a difference in their life. Yep. And I think that that's a message that, we can say is, I can yell and scream at the border that I'm not going down and doing anything about. I'm saying I can yell extreme from here and say like, oh, this is so difficult and I can't put up with this. We're in a state of emergency, when really I just got to get off my butt. And, I always use this when I'm talking to people in my own community kind of circle of individuals. I teach from the Bible. It's a Bible verse. Okay. And it's James 1:27. One of the last parts of that verse, it says, go to their trouble. So it's talking about widows and orphans and, the people who are removed from their communities and moving to somewhere else. You go and basically the idea is you meet them where they are. It doesn't mean I'm going to go down to Colombia and go, hey guys, I got a bus, But what it means is when they arrive, they've got a whole lot of trouble they're showing up with. Yeah. And I don't mean that they are trouble. It means that they have a story. They have a past. They have a situation. And they've traveled thousands of miles to get here. how can I make them feel like it's okay and they're safe? Because that's what I do when I pick up a rifle and I go defend our country somewhere else in the world.
Yeah. And I think there's another line that goes along with that. Those people that are religious out there, or that are Christian out there, there's a lot of complaints about illegal immigration. Now, there is illegal immigration that is harming the U.S. I'm not going to deny that. That
Right.
obviously happens. But there's a lot of illegal immigration of people who feel that they have no other option. And so they are running from something, and this is the best route.
Yeah.
And how many of us haven't done that ourselves? When, we need to go over the speed limit because we're trying to get somewhere to the hospital or to an appointment that we're running late for. And to say, an emergency is because we're running late to an appointment and therefore we're allowed to break the law.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of situations that we run into every single day where we feel this is more important to break the law than to follow the law because there's a reason for it. And so in the Bible, when the woman was taken in adultery, Jesus said, "Let he who is without sin first cast a stone." And I like that because it is who among you haven't done something similar. He didn't say he who has committed adultery, let him, or who, anyone who
comparatively, yeah.
It's not just that specific sin. It's anyone who has sinned.
Yeah.
Is not allowed to condemn her. And so the same idea with illegal immigration, we need to crack down on the illegal immigration that is damaging society. But the illegal immigrants that come in that just have no other option and they are escaping something. And so they are breaking the rules and they know they're breaking the rules. But in their view, they are breaking the rules because they need to. They need to get out of whatever situation they're in. And so who among us is quote unquote without sin, who haven't broken the law, to condemn them? Now, we've talked about a lot of very serious things. And there are a lot of people that are probably going to leave comments on this or this or that. And even Adam and I don't see eye to eye on this topic inherently, some of the nuances here. I have a quote here. This is from G.K. Chesterton. "Angels can fly because they can take themselves lightly." This is a really important concept. Anytime you come across someone where you are in a debate situation where you have differing views, take yourselves lightly. Do not take yourself so seriously that you are going to destroy who you are.
Yeah.
Adam and I take ourselves lightly. We can have a discussion. And we're still friends and colleagues and coworkers after it.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing, is treat each other with kindness and treat this topic with what it deserves. When you have someone of a differing opinion, don't take yourself too seriously.
I think about this, and I didn't realize the correlation between these two, but when I looked at what the subtopic is going to be, I think about it being a lighthouse, and the purpose of a lighthouse is to really make sure that you are in front of the harbor and bringing those ships in safely, so that they know that, hey, let's navigate it this way so that you avoid this rock outcropping, and realistically, from all parts of the world, the United States really represents a lighthouse in its sense of saying, like, look, we put out that beacon. It's out there saying, come here. We have the land of opportunity, the land of the free, the land of great benefits, like whatever it is, and citizens and people who are here can get really jaded because it's not just an advertisement slogan. It's there is opportunity. This is a place where you can make that happen, and you're not going to face, severe oppressive, type dictatorship that governs and steals.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, we have our problems. We're not squeaky clean. We still have a giant mess that we're trying to navigate together, and we're all still just a bunch of idiots running through this, And so I think that considering yourself a lighthouse in this situation is to say, how can I make it so that this isn't just a crisis, but know that those people are coming to me in crisis? And so, rather than it being like, I take it personal that you're invading my land kind of a thing, one, don't take your land so personal, and two, be the lighthouse. Be the lighthouse that makes sure that other people can come into the harbor safely. Now, I don't disagree with the sense of it needs to be looked at, taken under control in some capacity. Running wild the way that it is right now is hurting things. And so the attention needs to stay on it until something is done about it. But I think that we're going about that wrong in the something that we're pursuing, and the blaming and pointing in what direction and not. But as far as lighthouses are concerned, the biggest thing is that Sally Snowman, or Snowman, I don't know how you would say that, but I feel like that name is made up. But for 300 years, the Boston Beacon Lighthouse on Little Brewster Island in Boston guides ships safely back to harbor. And there's been 70 lighthouse keepers there.
Wow.
And Sally Snowman is the last lighthouse keeper in the United States. And as of the beginning of the year, there's no more lighthouse. She stepped down, officially retired. Well, stepped down from lighthouse keeper. She'll probably do something else. But this is an article I found. Kalina Fraga. Oh goodness, I messed up that name. Published just a week ago. But really, honestly, I like this story because it talks about kind of what we're talking, today is how can we be a lighthouse for a big problem of people coming for safety, and I'm supposed to guide them in with a light. That's what a lighthouse's job is for. And to say that the reason why, she's stepping down is because the Coast Guard doesn't use lighthouses anymore. There's too many other technological advances that have made it obsolete. They're cool. They're really pretty. They're nice, like memory, like museum stops at this point in time, but there's not really a use for them. Even this one that if she's stepping down as lighthouse keeper, you might have a few dinghies that are out there doing stuff, but honestly, there's just too much tech out there now.
Kind of like DOS.
Kind of like DOS. So, hey, U.S. government, take a note out of the National Guards list, or the Coast Guards. The Coast Guards. That is sad. But Sally Snowman. So she admires this. It was she's served at this Boston lighthouse for the last 21 years, and like I said, before her, 70 others have served at that lighthouse. So it has a big heritage. It has a big, long line of people who have been there and served there. And but she grew up. She was super happy about serving there for the last 21 years. And also, it stems longer than that. Back in, I guess, 1994, back in the 1900s, as my kids would say. Makes me feel way old. But being that, like, she's had that love for lighthouses going way back when she was a child, and I feel bad that she was, she's actually younger than me. So wow. I look at the math here. She was 10 years old in 1994 when she she goes, she told her dad, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to get married out here. And I did. Oh, no. Hold on a sec. She's not that old. She's older than that.
Okay.
No, let's see. My first was when I was 10 years old. Okay. She was okay. I'm just going to say this because it's easier than trying to mess it up as I've done so far. She said, my first experience to Boston Light was when I was 10 years old. Snowman said, I stepped off to the beach and looked up at the light and said, Daddy, when I grow up, I want to get married out here. And I did in 1994. So I'm like, oh, that makes more sense. That's the picture of her. I was like, there's no way she's younger than me.
There you go.
Anyway, the story is just basically some heartfelt story about, hey, like this is the last lighthouse that was being kept here, and there's no more in the U.S. at this point. They're being purchased by, they're being sold off by the Coast Guard, and they're being purchased by private owners that just want to. They're going to be. I don't know what they're going to do, but I think a lot of these, especially ones that have such a deep story behind it, like this Boston Light, is something that's going to stick around for a while. They're going to preserve that history.
Yeah, and it's great to have that kind of history. But again, being Buddhist, one of the Buddhist teachings is not to be attached.
Yeah.
Because attachment brings sorrow and suffering. And we see that a lot. We get so attached to these old things and we don't want to move on, and we don't upgrade. We don't improve because we're so attached to what we had. And we have to let go. We have to move forward, and we have to move on into the future. And that's how we're going to develop. That's how we're going to grow. And so we have to, in my view, remove a lot of those attachments. Yeah, they're great. They're fun. But we can't rely so much on them that we don't move forward.
I remember.
So I think this is a great move.
Yeah. I think so too. If it had a use other than nostalgia, and maybe pictures that you could hang on your wall and, plastered designs to scale of what it looks like, neat, keep it up, but at the same time, I do understand, like, we're just moving in a direction in our world that it doesn't require that. And that's okay. Like DOS should be.
Yeah.
Move
on from DOS.
Anyway, we have reached the end of our show. And honestly, I think that this was a peaceful one, surprisingly. No, I'm not surprised. I enjoy having a conversation with you, Joe. But as for our listener, life is too short. So keep laughing and keep learning. Consider yourself angelic. Don't take things so hard. And remember, idiots have way more fun.
Check your shoes.